Hello, family. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The room was quiet, too quiet. The rhythmic beeping of machines and the faint humming of fluorescent lights filled the sterile air, but none of it reached Ruth's ears in full. She was trapped in her own body, floating somewhere between pain and darkness. Her head felt heavy, her limbs foreign. Everything around her, the slow footsteps of nurses, the metallic clink of tools, felt far away, like echoes from another world. Her last memory before waking up in this haze was of reaching for a glass of water in her living room, and then the crashing thud of her own body hitting the staircase. Now everything was blurry. A soft chill grazed her skin under the hospital sheet, and even though her eyes wouldn't open, she could feel that she wasn't alone. Somewhere inside her half-conscious mind, fragments of laughter, David's laughter, bubbled to the surface of her memory. He had laughed with her once, held her hands during thunderstorms, whispered that he'd protect her forever. That man was nowhere to be found now. In the distance, muffled voices drifted in. The door creaked. She wanted to turn her head, but her body didn't obey. Then she heard it, heels clicking against the floor, a woman's voice laced with irritation, and a man's quiet murmur in response. "How long is this going to take?" the woman asked sharply. Ruth's heart tried to race, but it only fluttered weakly. That voice, Maria's, her friend. Her friend who hadn't visited her since she was hospitalized. Then David's voice joined in, much closer, colder than she'd ever heard it. "She's not going to make it, and honestly, she's more useful to us gone." The words slammed into her like a truck. "David!" She wanted to cry out, but no sound came. "Let's talk to the doctor," Maria said softly, almost seductively, as if Ruth was a stain they needed to wipe off the surface of their perfect new life. Ruth's fingers twitched barely. She was not dead. She was not gone. And somehow, if life gave her even the smallest opening, she would live long enough to remember every word they just said, and make sure they'd regret it. The soft hiss of the air conditioner did little to cool the rising heat flooding Ruth's chest. She lay still, locked inside her own body, but her mind began clearing like clouds parting after a storm. The sound of heels tapping closer stopped just beside her bed. Then came a familiar scent, expensive vanilla perfume. A hand brushed against her fingers, lingering. "Still no movement," Maria muttered. "Good. The sooner they let her go, the better." Ruth's stomach twisted. She had known Maria since university. She was the one who helped Ruth choose David's engagement ring. And now, here she was, standing over her hospital bed like a vulture waiting for a final breath. David entered quietly, his voice calmer, but just as heartless. "I spoke to the doctor this morning. He's hesitating. We need to convince him it's for the best. This situation is draining me." Maria scoffed. "It's draining you? I'm the one hiding in the shadows while she gets all the sympathy." Ruth's heart cried out, but her body remained frozen. Her mind screamed to sit up, to slap them both, to ask why her, why now? But her lips didn't move. Instead, she listened as David pulled a chair closer. "We'll tell the doctor her brain activity is erratic. Maybe he'll see reason. She wouldn't want to live like this anyway." Ruth couldn't believe what she was hearing. These weren't whispers of worry. They were schemes of murder. She could feel Maria's breath close to her ear as she leaned in and whispered mockingly, "Sleep tight, darling. We'll take good care of your house." Ruth's fingers twitched again. Just slightly, but it was enough for a quiet gasp from Maria. "Did you see that?" she asked David, stepping back. "Muscle spasm. It happens," he replied quickly, brushing it off. Their voices faded as they left the room. Ruth felt a single tear slip down her cheek. She was awake. She was aware. And now her own life depended on pretending not to be. Hours passed. The sun dipped outside the hospital window, casting amber light across the white walls. Ruth remained motionless, listening to every passing footstep, every murmur in the hallway. Then came the conversation that would change everything. Through the slightly opened door, she heard David again, speaking with calm authority. "Dr. Okoro, it's time. She's not responding. She hasn't for days." His voice held just the right amount of faux sadness. "We've come to terms with it. It's what Ruth would have wanted. Ruth's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to scream, "No, it isn't." Maria's voice followed, dripping with false compassion. She was always afraid of being a burden. She told me that once. "Please, doctor, help her rest." The audacity left Ruth numb. But the doctor didn't respond immediately. There was a long silence before a firm, thoughtful voice responded. "I understand your concern, Mr. Adams, but decisions like this require thorough neurological confirmation. I'll conduct one more assessment today." His tone was polite, but there was something beneath it. Ruth recognized the voice. Somewhere in her mind, buried under years of separation, the voice clicked into place. Donald, Dr. Donald Okoro, the boy who once defended her from bullies at age 10. The boy who knew how she thought and who could read her eyes like books. "You'll be wasting your time," David muttered. "We're trying to be practical here." But Donald's reply was final. "It's my responsibility to ensure every patient has a chance. I'll see her shortly." The footsteps faded. Alone once again, Ruth felt something shift inside her, not hope yet, but the tiniest flicker of recognition. Maybe fate wasn't done with her after all. The door opened with a soft creak. Ruth fought to steady her breathing. She expected another routine nurse's check, or worse, Maria pretending to be a caring friend again. But instead, the scent of antiseptic was overtaken by something familiar. Donald stepped in, closing the door quietly behind him. He approached slowly, clipboard in hand, but when he reached her side, his voice dropped to a whisper. "Ruth, if you can hear me, blink twice." Her eyelashes fluttered once, then again. Donald inhaled sharply, fighting back emotion. "I knew it," he whispered. "You've always been stubborn." Ruth wanted to cry, but he quickly composed himself. "Listen to me carefully. Don't react. Not even if it hurts. Your husband and his companion want you dead. But I'm not letting that happen." As he leaned down to check her vitals, his hand gently pressed a note into her palm. "Play along. I'm protecting you," it read. Her eyes blurred from sudden tears. Donald continued speaking aloud, professionally, for anyone outside the door who might be listening. No changes in reflex, still no voluntary movement. "I'll run more tests." He scribbled something on the clipboard, then whispered again under his breath, "You're safe now, but you have to trust me." Ruth had never felt more vulnerable in her life, yet somehow, with Donald there, a thin layer of fear peeled away. His voice was calm, determined. "I'll transfer you tonight, somewhere private, somewhere only I control." The door creaked again. He stood upright. "Thank you for your patience," he said to someone in the hall. "We'll proceed with all due medical responsibility." When the door shut once more, Ruth exhaled slowly through her nose. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was beginning to hope. The night air was thick with tension as the hospital's quiet corridors echoed with the distant sound of rolling wheels. Donald moved swiftly, wheeling Ruth, still unresponsive to the outside world, down a restricted hallway at the back of the building. Dressed in scrubs and flanked by one trusted nurse, he signed falsified discharge documents under the alias of a private research clinic. No questions were asked. "She's being transferred for neurological isolation therapy," he explained to the security guard with such confidence that no one thought to challenge him. Ruth lay still under the covers, heart pounding beneath her ribs. Though she couldn't lift her head, her senses were sharper than ever. Every turn of the stretcher, every whispered instruction, planted one thought deeper in her mind. "I'm not dead. I'm being rescued." Outside, a discreet black ambulance waited with no insignia. It was raining lightly. Donald leaned close as they loaded her inside. "You made it this far, Ruth. I've got you now." They arrived at a secluded private rehabilitation facility nestled beyond the city's outskirts, where the staff had been carefully pre-briefed under confidentiality contracts. Inside her new room, warm-toned walls and soft lighting replaced the sterile coldness of the hospital. For the first time in days, Ruth was surrounded by peace. Donald sat by her bedside, exhaustion creeping across his face. "You don't owe me anything," he said gently, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "But I owe you my best. You once gave me confidence when I was just a lanky boy too afraid to speak. Now it's my turn to protect you." Ruth's eyes fluttered weakly in response. He smiled. "You're safe here, and I'll help you heal. But when you're ready..." We'll talk about what they did. In that moment, surrounded by truth and no more lies, Ruth made a silent vow. Whatever strength she had left would not be used for mourning, it would be for rising. Ruth's first morning in the private facility was both unfamiliar and frightening. As nurses moved around her carefully, adjusting IVs and checking machines, she began to feel the ache of her body returning to her. The numbness was fading, but so was her illusion of safety. Lying in the calm of the softly lit room, she processed everything: David's betrayal, Maria's cruelty, the doctor's intervention. It was too much. Tears spilled quietly as her lips barely parted for the first time in days. When Donald entered later that afternoon, carrying a tablet and a small smoothie in hand, she managed to turn her head slightly. "You're improving already," he said with a gentle smile. "Soon you'll be able to move as you did before." Ruth's voice emerged like a crack through glass. "They tried to kill me, Donald." He nodded solemnly. "I know, and now we take back control piece by piece." Later that evening, Donald brought a notebook and placed it on her bedside table. "I need you to begin documenting everything you remember. Conversations, motions, emotions, even your fall." Ruth blinked in confusion. "My fall? I tripped, I think," she murmured. Donald frowned. "That's what they want you to think." He explained that during the initial scans, the bruising patterns and head trauma didn't align with a normal household fall. "I suspect someone pushed you." Ruth's hands clenched slightly. The very idea made her stomach turn. "David wouldn't." She stopped herself mid-sentence. "He would. He already had." "You're not weak, Ruth," Donald said firmly. "You're still here. And I'm going to help you use that pain if you're willing." Ruth inhaled deeply, then nodded with intention. The seed of her fight had been planted, watered by betrayal and rooted in truth. And now, with every passing day, she would grow stronger, not just to survive, but to reclaim what was hers. Back in the city, Barbara Jones stared at her sister's framed wedding photo on the hallway wall. She hadn't left Ruth's apartment since the accident. It still smelled like her, cinnamon candles and lavender. Something wasn't sitting right. She was perfectly fine that morning, Barbara muttered to herself, sorting through her sister's laundry that Ruth had folded just hours before her fall. Her gut twisted every time she replayed the news of Ruth's unresponsive state. David's reactions during the hospital visits had been oddly composed, mechanical even. And Maria hadn't shown her face once. Barbara decided it was time to visit the hospital again. When she arrived unannounced, the nurse on duty offered only stiff smiles and evasive answers. "Dr. Okaro's unavailable at the moment," she said, tapping nervously on her tablet. Barbara narrowed her eyes. "Is my sister still here?" The nurse hesitated. She was transferred to a neurological center under medical orders. Barbara's blood ran cold. "Where?" Later that evening, Barbara confronted David at his home. He stood at the bar in a silk shirt, swirling whiskey in a glass as if nothing had happened. "Transferred?" she asked coldly. Without informing her only sibling, David exhaled like she was an inconvenience. "She's practically a vegetable, Barbara. The doctor recommended it. Don't get emotional." "Don't patronize me," she snapped. "You don't even look like a grieving husband." He sipped calmly. "Grieving won't bring her back." That was the moment Barbara knew something was deeply wrong. She studied his face, no sadness, no remorse, just calculation. As she stormed out, she murmured to herself, "I don't know what you're hiding, David, but I swear I'll find out." And in the silence that followed, David stood frozen, staring into his drink, because for the first time since Ruth's fall, someone was watching. Inside her new recovery room, the flicker of screens replaced the stillness Ruth had once known. Donald had set up a discreet surveillance system, connecting live feeds from hidden cameras planted inside David's home, installed by a private tech specialist under the guise of a routine Wi-Fi upgrade. "It's time you saw the truth for yourself," Donald said as he handed her a tablet. Ruth stared blankly at the screen before pressing play. The footage revealed David walking through the living room, his arm around Maria, their laughter echoing in her former home. The dining table she had carefully chosen was now crowded with wine bottles and a gaudy centerpiece Maria had clearly bought. "This place finally feels like mine," Maria smirked in the video. David leaned in, kissed her cheek, and replied, It should have always been yours. Ruth's hand trembled, the device nearly slipping from her grasp. Her breath caught in her throat as she watched them move into what used to be her bedroom. New sheets, new furniture, even the curtains had been replaced. She froze when she saw Maria open a small velvet box. Inside was the necklace Ruth had received from her late mother, a family heirloom. "He gave this to me last night," Maria cooed in the footage. Said it was too precious to keep locked away. Ruth's eyes welled up with tears. That necklace had once been her most sacred possession. "They erased me," she whispered. Donald sat beside her, his voice quiet but firm. "They wanted you gone. And they're building a world on the ashes of your silence. But you're not gone, Ruth. You're watching." She stared at the footage again, but this time with a steadier gaze. Every betrayal fueled her. Every stolen laugh, every lie, added another brick to the fortress she was silently building. One day, they'd hear her voice again, and it would be the sound that ended everything they'd built. Barbara waited in her car outside David's estate, notebook in hand, chewing the end of a pen with restless anxiety. She had questions, far too many, and none of them were being answered. As she tracked Maria's movements for the third evening in a row, she finally made a decision. She dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Hello," came the familiar deep voice. "Richard Cole?" she asked. "It's Barbara Jones. I need your help." He paused, then said, "What's this about?" She replied firmly, "My sister didn't fall. She was pushed into silence. I need someone who knows how to follow lies." Richard, once a decorated private investigator and a trusted friend of their late father, agreed to meet her the next morning. "Bring everything you've got," he said. "And Barbara, be ready for what we find." The following day, they sat in Richard's office, its walls lined with decades of files and dusty trophies. Barbara laid out receipts, hospital memos, photos from the anniversary Ruth never lived to attend. "The house was cleaned out like she never existed," she said bitterly. He even canceled her magazine subscriptions. Richard flipped through her notes carefully, his brow furrowing. He transferred large sums from their joint account just days before her fall. Did she know? Barbara shook her head. They were having issues, but she thought it was just stress. She never suspected. "Most victims don't," Richard interrupted, tapping the folder. "This isn't just betrayal, it's a setup." Barbara leaned back, the weight of those words heavy on her chest. "Then help me unravel it," she whispered. Richard nodded. "We start with the Mistress, and we watch everything she does." As Barbara left his office, she felt a shift inside, like the moment before a storm breaks. They hadn't just taken Ruth's body. They were burying her story. But now, someone was digging it back up. Laughter echoed from behind the golden doors of the upscale rooftop venue as guests clinked glasses and posed for photos. David was hosting a New Beginnings dinner party, a thinly veiled celebration on what should have been his 6th wedding anniversary with Ruth. Dressed in an expensive navy tuxedo, he toasted Maria in front of friends and colleagues who assumed Ruth had passed quietly months ago. "To love, to life, and to the future," he said, raising a glass of champagne as Maria beamed beside him in a shimmering gold dress. What none of them noticed was the woman in a black scarf slipping into the farthest seat of the room, Barbara. She sat at the back with her phone recording discreetly, her face calm, but eyes sharp. "You're really celebrating her death?" she muttered beneath her breath. The wine, the laughter, the flowers, all of it felt obscene. Even the ring on Maria's finger sparkled with mockery. At that moment, Ruth was sitting miles away, watching the party unfold on Donald's screen. He had tapped into a live security feed from the venue's main camera system. Ruth's jaw tightened when she saw Maria twirling in the same heels Ruth had worn to their 5th anniversary dinner the year before. "He's parading her," she whispered. Donald glanced at her, noticing her clenched fists. "He's slipping, Ruth. The louder they laugh, the harder they'll fall." On screen, Barbara stood slowly and approached the couple's table. "Didn't think I'd show?" she said, her voice loud enough for nearby guests to pause. David stiffened. "Barbara, this isn't the time." She smiled coolly. "You're right. The time was when you buried your wife and moved on like she never existed." The tension in the room turned palpable. Maria tugged at David's arm, whispering nervously. Ruth leaned forward, eyes fixed on her sister. "Barbara's not afraid anymore," she said softly. And in that moment, surrounded by noise and glitter, Ruth didn't feel broken. She felt seen. The rain poured gently outside the chapel that day, but inside, everything glowed. Ruth stood in her ivory lace gown, her hands trembling slightly as she faced David at the altar. He had looked into her eyes then, promising the world with a voice steady and sure. "I vow to protect your heart as I would my own," he had said, placing a ring on her finger. In the pews, Maria smiled with quiet pride, holding Ruth's bouquet moments before she walked down the aisle. Ruth's narration played gently over the memory. "He looked like a man I could trust. I believed he saw me." Their honeymoon was a quiet escape to the coast, meals under moonlight, laughter that echoed through sea breezes, and long conversations about building a future. "We'll have 2 children," David had once whispered into her shoulder. "A girl with your eyes, a boy with my spirit." Ruth had held on to that fantasy like oxygen. But as the years passed, the cracks began to show, subtle at first. Missed dinner dates, passive-aggressive remarks, unanswered texts. Ruth gave excuses on his behalf. "He's stressed," she told Barbara. "He's under pressure at work." But something inside her had started to fade. She remembered the night she returned home with food from his favorite restaurant, only to find him in the backyard, laughing too closely with Maria. "You're imagining things," David had said when she confronted him later. "You're getting paranoid." Ruth had apologized for even suggesting it. She had wanted to believe the best in him. "I was building a life with a man already planning my exit," Ruth whispered to herself now. Staring at the wedding photo, Donald had left on her bedside for emotional therapy, and I mistook silence for peace. The truth was she hadn't lost David now. She'd been losing him in pieces for years. Richard sat at his desk late into the night, sifting through the copied contents of Maria's phone. He had gained access through a cloned device, courtesy of a digital specialist. As he scrolled past text messages and selfies, his eyes landed on a hidden app disguised as a calculator. Inside was a digital journal, dated, password-protected, but easily cracked by the specialist. "She keeps everything," Richard murmured. Audio memos, diary entries, even intimate photos. But one entry stopped him cold. In a recording dated 2 days after Ruth's fall, Maria's voice said, "I can't believe how easy it was. I thought I'd feel guilty watching them roll her out, but I don't. She was never meant to wake up." Richard leaned back in disbelief. "This isn't just infidelity, this is premeditation." He quickly forwarded the files to Barbara and Ruth's lawyer, tagging them with a note. "We have her. Let's build carefully." At the recovery center, Ruth listened to the audio in stunned silence. The voice was unmistakably Maria's, her tone casual, smug. "David thinks this will all go away with time. He says we'll travel to Morocco by next spring. He even wants to name our baby after his mother." "Can you imagine?" Ruth's stomach churned. "She's pregnant?" she asked, eyes darting to Donald. "Possibly. Or just manipulating him." Donald's jaw tightened. "Either way, they're growing bolder. We can use that." Ruth clenched her fist slowly, the once shattered bones of her hand now gaining strength. "She wanted me erased," she said, her voice calm but cold. "But she left her fingerprints all over the crime." Ruth turned to Donald. "We're not reacting anymore. We strike next." Donald nodded, and for the first time since the betrayal, Ruth didn't feel like a victim. She felt like a woman with a loaded deck and patience sharp enough to cut. It was past midnight when Donald knocked on Ruth's door carrying a sleek black laptop. His face was pale, as if he had seen something that unsettled even him. Ruth sat up in bed, brushing her recovering hand against her knee. "What is it?" she asked. He placed the laptop on her lap and hit play. The audio began, David's voice clear, decisive. "If she goes, it frees us both. That's what we agreed on." Maria responded, "Donald's hesitating. He's too cautious. Maybe we need to pressure him more. If Ruth makes it out of this, it's your inheritance on the line, not mine." Ruth covered her mouth. The voices were unmistakable. "Let her die," David said next. "Do whatever it takes to make it clean." Silence fell in the room. The air felt colder, heavier. Donald finally spoke. "I had a voice recorder planted during their consult. I wasn't going to act without proof." Ruth didn't blink. She didn't cry. She only stared at the screen as the file ended. "We'll use this in court," Donald said gently. "But not yet. If we release it too early, they'll bury the rest of the trail. We need them to keep digging their own graves. Ruth nodded slowly. And I want Maria to hear it, not from the news, from me. Donald met her gaze with quiet approval. We'll time it right. Ruth exhaled, her hands surprisingly steady. Do you believe in justice, Donald? She asked. I believe in truth, he answered. And I believe yours is just beginning. Ruth looked out the window, moonlight dancing on her skin. That night, she didn't dream of betrayal or death. She dreamt of a courtroom, of a reckoning, of Maria's shocked face, and of David, speechless, watching the woman he left for dead rise, voice intact, vengeance sealed, and stronger than ever. The morning sun filtered softly into Ruth's room as Donald sat across from her with a small stack of legal documents. His eyes scanned her face carefully. You're physically stronger now, Ruth. It's time to start thinking ahead, legally. She nodded, reaching for the pen with a steady hand. David had power of attorney over my health, my finances, even the house. Strip him of all of it, she said. Donald smiled faintly. That's already in motion. But I've brought in someone you need to meet. A moment later, a graceful woman entered the room, Olivia Daniels, a longtime legal ally of Donald's and a specialist in estate reclamation. You're not the first woman to wake up from betrayal, Olivia said, her voice calm yet fierce. But you will be one of the rare few who wins without breaking the law. Together, the three of them worked over the next few days to draft quiet but powerful changes, nullifying David's rights over every shared asset, rerouting Ruth's frozen accounts to her private backups, and authorizing Olivia as her legal voice in public. If he tries to move anything else, we'll trap him in his own paperwork, Olivia said. Ruth signed the final page of the affidavit and leaned back, her breath calm. I've been asleep long enough, she said. Donald handed her a fresh folder marked confidential, personal statement draft. This we'll release later, but it needs to be in your words. Ruth flipped open the folder, then looked up. He won't even see it coming, she whispered. Her gaze turned to the window. Beyond it, the world carried on, unaware that the woman they had buried in sympathy was about to rise, not as a widow, but as a witness with evidence, rage, and a paper trail. David sat in his polished office, legs crossed, phone pressed to his ear. His brow was furrowed as the CFO from the firm's headquarters spoke through the line. We've detected financial irregularities, David. Transfers to an unverified third-party account linked to your wife's estate. Care to explain? David swallowed hard. Those were legal reallocations. My wife's in a coma. I have power of attorney. The man on the line didn't budge. That authority has been revoked. As of 2 days ago, you're no longer listed on any of her accounts. David stood abruptly, knocking over a pen holder. That's impossible. But his phone buzzed again, a message from the bank. All joint accounts frozen by court order. Maria, sitting across from him on the leather couch, raised an eyebrow. Something wrong, darling? She asked sweetly. He gritted his teeth. She's pulling strings. That doctor. I should have silenced him sooner. Maria stood, her tone suddenly cold. You said this was all handled. I didn't agree to this mess. David turned on her, eyes wild. You wanted her gone too? Maria raised her hands. And I thought you had the brains to make it clean. But now we're being watched. I can feel it. She walked out, slamming the office door. Alone, David slumped into his chair, sweat beading along his temple. He thought he had full control. Ruth out of the picture, the business flourishing, the next chapter of his life with Maria already unfolding. But the edges of his empire were fraying. And for the first time since the fall, David Adams realized something terrifying. The woman he had tried to erase was moving, somehow, and the walls were closing in faster than he could manage. That evening, David made a desperate move. He drove to an obscure notary office on the outskirts of town, one he had used for other discreet affairs. A short, balding man named Felix greeted him at the door. Mr. Adams, you brought the document? David handed over a forged version of Ruth's will, printed on aged paper, complete with a falsified signature. This version names me as sole beneficiary of the Adams estate, he explained calmly. Felix raised an eyebrow. This signature looks recent. David replied curtly. It's from her old files. Just notarize it. Felix hesitated, but eventually complied, stamping the page and slipping it into an envelope. David left the building feeling triumphant, finally ahead of the game again. What he didn't know was that Barbara had followed him from the house. From a parked car down the road, she snapped photos of the license plate, the office door, and David exchanging a thick envelope with Felix. She forwarded them immediately to Richard, captioning them, "He's forging documents. We have proof." That night, Richard met with Olivia in secret, and together they prepared a counterstrike. A notarized timestamp from the facility where Ruth's handwriting had recently been logged, contradicting the forgery. "They're getting sloppy," Richard remarked. Barbara replied, "No, they're getting scared. And fear makes people bold and stupid." From her private suite, Ruth was updated on every detail. She leaned back in her chair, lips parting with a whisper. "Let him keep digging. By the time I rise, he'll have already buried himself." Wrapped in a long brown trench coat and a curly synthetic wig, Ruth stood at the edge of a crowded open-air market, blending seamlessly into the background. It had been months since she last stepped outside without medical supervision. Her breathing was steady, but her heart beat with cautious urgency. Donald had reluctantly approved her outing, only under heavy disguise and for a brief window of observation. "You sure you want to see this?" he had asked earlier that morning. "I need to," Ruth replied. "I want to see the life she's living." Now, standing behind a row of fruit stalls, Ruth spotted Maria across the street. Dressed in designer jeans and sunglasses, she stood confidently beside a sleek black SUV, her laugh echoing across the space as she picked up imported groceries. Maria's fingers danced over her phone screen as she posed for a selfie beside the car, probably uploading to some story with a caption like "Sunshine and Success." Ruth stood still, resisting the urge to confront her. She watched as Maria pulled out her phone again, this time to answer a call. "David, I told you we need to be smarter," Maria said, her voice sharper. "You think just because you got that will signed, we're in the clear? You clearly don't understand how paper trails work." Ruth's eyes narrowed, her ears attuned to every word. Then came the sting. She made everything difficult when she was alive. It's just like her to cause trouble even now. Maria hung up and walked toward a boutique, completely unaware that just meters away, Ruth was silently witnessing her arrogance. Donald appeared beside Ruth moments later, gently guiding her back toward the car. "You've seen enough," he whispered. Ruth nodded, face expressionless. But inside, a fire had reignited, not of revenge alone, but of reclamation. "She stole more than my husband," Ruth murmured as she slid into the back seat. "She stole my peace, and I'm going to take it back." The following week, Maria awoke to a strange envelope slid under the door. It had no return address, just her name written in red ink. Inside was a single printed message. "She knows." Her breath hitched. "David," she yelled, stumbling into the living room. "What the hell is this?" David, shirtless and groggy, rubbed his eyes. "What's wrong with you?" She threw the note at him. "You think this is funny?" He frowned. "Where did this come from?" Maria shook her head. "You said this was buried. You said we were safe." David scoffed. "It's just someone trying to mess with you. You're being paranoid." Maria wasn't convinced. The night before, she had sensed someone watching her at the parking lot. And now this? Her nerves were fraying. "I'm not paranoid," she hissed. "I know when I'm being hunted." Across town, Ruth sat with Donald in the rehab center's small office, watching Maria's reaction through security footage from the hallway camera they had tapped into weeks ago. Maria paced the floor like a caged animal, her confidence unraveling. "She's slipping," Ruth observed, arms folded. "She's not used to fear," Donald nodded. "Fear exposes people, and the more exposed she feels, the more careless she'll become." Ruth leaned forward. "Then let's make her feel it everywhere, on the street, in her home, in his arms." That same night, Maria received another note tucked into her car windshield. "You can't bury the living." She ripped it in two, but her hands trembled. Her dreams that evening were haunted by blurred images of Ruth, standing, staring, whispering her name. She woke up screaming. "She's dead," she repeated to herself in the mirror. "She's dead." But no matter how many times she said it, the shadow in her gut told her otherwise. The grand foyer of the Adams estate buzzed with artificial cheer as David hosted a networking brunch for corporate allies and investors. Platters of finger foods were passed around while a string quartet played softly. But Barbara didn't come for the music. Dressed in a navy blue pantsuit and heels that clicked purposefully against the marble, she walked in uninvited, drawing stares. David spotted her instantly, his smile fading. "Barbara," he muttered through clenched teeth as he approached. "This isn't the time or place." "You never made time," she snapped. "So I brought the time to you." Maria stood behind him, frozen with her mimosa halfway to her lips. "Careful," David warned. "You're embarrassing yourself." Barbara crossed her arms. "You buried your wife emotionally before she ever fell. Now you want to erase her completely?" Gasps rippled quietly through the crowd. David's composure cracked slightly. "Let's talk outside," he muttered, gripping her elbow. But Barbara stood firm. "No, you'll hear me in front of the same people who toasted your fresh start." Her voice rose slightly. "Ruth loved you. She gave up dreams, friendships, time, only to be discarded like old linen. But mark my words, David, the story isn't over. And neither is she." A few guests shifted uncomfortably. Maria pulled David aside, whispering frantically. "She knows something. We need to shut this down." But David wasn't listening. His eyes were locked on Barbara, whose steady gaze pierced through his carefully curated mask. Back in the car, Barbara called Richard. "He's on edge." He tried to stay composed, but he's rattled. Richard replied, "Good. A man on the edge walks himself right into the fire." And as Barbara looked back at the mansion through the window, she whispered, "The fire's already lit." Ruth sat quietly at a writing desk in her recovery suite, the world outside muted by drawn curtains. In front of her lay a sheet of soft cream paper, untouched until now. With her hand steadier than it had been in weeks, she picked up the pen and began to write. "Dear Mum and Dad," the letter began. "I wish you were here. I wish I could tell you everything without pain tightening my chest." Her pen moved slowly, but the words flowed like a healing wound. "They tried to end me, but I'm still here. And I've seen the truth, not just about David, but about myself. I was too forgiving, too hopeful. But now I see clearer." She paused, wiping a tear before it hit the page, then continued, "I miss you both. But I know now you didn't raise a fool. You raised a fighter, and I promise you I will make this right." She folded the letter carefully, placing it into a sealed envelope addressed simply, "To my parents, when justice is done." Donald entered just as she pressed it into her journal. "You all right?" he asked gently. Ruth gave a faint nod, eyes glassy but fierce. "I just needed to remember who I am, before they made me doubt it." Donald walked over and sat beside her. "You're stronger now. I've watched you transform every day, not just physically, but emotionally. You've rebuilt what they tried to break." Ruth turned to him with quiet conviction. "I'm not healing to be whole for them. I'm healing to carry the weight of the truth." He reached for her hand, but stopped just short, sensing her boundaries. "Whatever happens next," he said softly, "just know you're not alone in this." Ruth looked down at her journal, her voice low but certain. "They took everything from me, except my will. That's the one thing they'll never control again." Barbara arrived at the main hospital wearing a denim jacket, a pair of glasses, and a nurse's borrowed ID badge. Richard had made the arrangements. "You've got 20 minutes max," he told her before she slipped inside. She moved swiftly through the corridor until she reached the records department. Her heart pounded as she scrolled through the touchscreen terminal. Patient Ruth Adams. The entry had a digital note, transferred no detailed activity beyond date. But something caught her attention. Ruth's official discharge had been signed not by Dr. Donald Okoro, but by a name Barbara didn't recognize. "Dr. T. Mensa," she whispered. Clicking further, she discovered the signature was forged. Just then, the door creaked open behind her. "Can I help you?" came a woman's voice. Barbara turned around slowly. A senior admin stood at the threshold, eyeing her with suspicion. Barbara clutched her clipboard. "Sorry, I was looking for patient notes on a former case study, for my thesis." The woman hesitated, then nodded slowly. "Just don't linger. Dr. Okoro is protective of his files." As the admin left, Barbara snapped a photo of the terminal and backed out of the room quickly. That evening, she met with Richard and showed him the photos. He studied them carefully. "They used a ghost signature to erase the trail," he muttered. That proves someone inside helped cover it. Barbara leaned forward. Do you think David knew? Richard frowned. No. If David orchestrated the transfer, he wouldn't need a forged sign-out. Someone else made sure Ruth disappeared, someone who didn't want the truth to surface until the time was right. Barbara felt her chest tighten. Then who? At that moment, her phone buzzed. A message from Donald appeared. We need to meet. Tomorrow. Alone. The mystery deepened, but so did the truth. The garden behind the recovery center was quiet, with late afternoon sunlight casting golden rays through the trees. Ruth sat on a bench under a flowering vine, her gaze lost in the rustle of leaves. She heard the crunch of gravel behind her and didn't need to turn. You always walked like that, she said softly. Donald chuckled. Still predictable after all these years. He sat beside her, leaving a gentle gap between them. For a while, neither spoke. Just the sound of wind and birds. Then Ruth broke the silence. Why did you help me, Donald? You risked everything, your job, your license, your name. He looked down at his hands. Because once, when I was a scared boy being mocked for my stutter, you stood up for me. No hesitation. You didn't care that it made you a target, too. I never forgot that. Ruth blinked slowly, absorbing his words. I was 12, she whispered, but you remembered. Donald nodded. And when I saw what David and Maria were doing, I couldn't be that scared boy again. I had to do something. Ruth turned to him, her expression softening. You didn't just save my life, Donald. You reminded me who I used to be. A quiet moment passed before he added, and who you still are. The wind stirred her hair as she looked away. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel whole again, she said. You don't have to be whole to fight, he replied. You just have to remember why you started. She glanced at him with gratitude and something else unspoken, then stood slowly. Come on, we've got more work to do. Donald rose beside her, and for the first time in a long while, Ruth didn't feel like she was walking alone. It was a Friday morning when headlines exploded across social media. CEO David Adams announces engagement to Maria Lawson. Photos showed David in a tailored gray suit, down on one knee before a tearfully smiling Maria, her hand outstretched, an ornate diamond ring catching the sunlight. Behind them stood a garden of manicured roses and a banner that read, New Beginnings. The announcement spread fast, shared by colleagues, clients, even old university classmates. David looked proud, victorious. Maria beamed radiant in her designer dress. He really went through with it, Ruth muttered, standing beside Donald in the media room. Donald's expression was unreadable as he handed her a printed version of the article. Ruth scanned the comments, some congratulatory, others confused by how quickly he'd moved on from tragic loss. I thought the world might see through him, she said, voice low. Donald looked at her. The world only sees what it's shown. But that's about to change. Ruth's gaze shifted to the screen. The image of Maria, flaunting her ring like a trophy, stirred something different in her now. Not anger, not grief, precision. She's craving validation. She wants to be seen as the one who won. Donald nodded. Then let her climb as high as she wants. The fall will be that much louder. Ruth smiled faintly. And we'll be the ones to cut the rope. Across town, Barbara read the news with pursed lips. This is desperation, she said to Richard. No man that guilty gets engaged so publicly, unless he's trying to outrun something. Richard leaned back, staring at the article. Or someone. Quietly, a storm was building, and soon neither David nor Maria would be able to stand in its eye. Inside the softly lit recording room of the facility, Ruth sat before a mounted camera, a glass of water on one side and a stack of personal documents on the other. Olivia stood beside the lens, adjusting the settings. No edits, Ruth said. Let them see every emotion, every crack in my voice. They need to know this is real. Donald nodded from the corner of the room, arms folded, silent in support. When the red light blinked on, Ruth inhaled and began. My name is Ruth Adams. Until a few months ago, I thought I had a marriage. A home. A partner. What I had was a plan, a quiet plan to erase me. Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. I was conscious when they told the doctor to let me die. I heard every word, and I chose to live. Not just to survive, but to speak. She held up the hospital discharge summary. This was faked. This was signed by someone who never met me. Then she placed a photo of David and Maria at their engagement dinner. This is the reward for betrayal. Ruth leaned forward, her tone steady now. You told the world I was gone. You said it was for my peace. But I'm still here, breathing, watching. And I'm done being silent. The silence that followed was heavy. Olivia clicked the camera off, blinking away tears. That was devastating, she whispered. Donald handed Ruth a tissue. We'll time the release. Right after the legal filing. Ruth looked down at the flash drive in her hand, then up at her reflection in the monitor. This isn't just my truth, it's my weapon. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rumbled. And with it came the promise that something long buried was about to rise. At precisely 9 a.m. on Monday, Olivia stepped into the courthouse in a black suit, her heels clicking with purpose as she submitted a sealed legal envelope to the clerk. Plaintiff, Ruth Naomi Adams. Defendants, David Ezekiel Adams and Maria Grace Lawson. The charges were listed boldly: attempted manslaughter, medical fraud, estate tampering, and identity suppression. Ruth waited inside a secure vehicle nearby, her fingers gripping the armrest as Donald read her the confirmed timestamp. It's done. They've been served. A deep breath escaped her lips. Then the war has officially begun. Across the city, David was in the middle of a board meeting when his assistant entered, pale and hesitant. Sir, you've been summoned. He frowned, took the envelope, and his face fell as he read the heading. This has to be a joke, he said aloud. Maria leaned over, her fingers curling tightly around his wrist. What is it? He tossed the document on the table. Ruth, she's suing us. The room grew deathly quiet. A board member whispered, But isn't she? David didn't answer. Instead, he stood abruptly and stormed out, dragging Maria behind him. This is impossible, he growled. How is she filing anything? Maria's face lost all color. You told me the doctor. Apparently, the doctor wasn't on our side, he snapped. And if she's alive. He didn't finish. Back at the facility, Ruth sat in silence as Olivia returned with a satisfied smile. The press will pick it up by evening, she said. Your story won't just be heard. It will explode. Ruth nodded slowly. Let them read it. Let them gasp. Let them realize I wasn't the one buried. I was the one digging. That night, as the city lights shimmered and court documents began circulating quietly among legal and media circles, Ruth finally felt the ground shift. Not beneath her, but under David and Maria's carefully built empire of lies. The marble courtroom buzzed with whispers as media personnel, legal aides, and curious onlookers filled the gallery. David sat at the defense table, jaw tense, hands clasped tightly in front of him. Maria, seated beside him, looked ghostly pale in her beige blazer, her fingers twitching with nerves. The judge entered, gavel striking sharply. Court is now in session for the matter of Ruth Naomi Adams versus David Ezekiel Adams and Maria Grace Lawson. Cameras weren't allowed inside, but that didn't stop word from spreading outside like wildfire. Olivia stood confidently at the plaintiff's side, waiting for the moment she'd prepared Ruth for over weeks. Then the courtroom doors opened, and silence fell like a sheet. Gasps escaped from the gallery. Murmurs rippled like thunder through the rows. There she stood, Ruth Adams, alive, standing tall in a sleek black dress and heels. Her hair framed her face softly, and her gaze was piercing as she walked with unflinching grace toward the plaintiff's seat. David's eyes widened, his mouth falling slightly open as if he'd seen a ghost. Maria froze, mouth quivering. How? She whispered. Ruth didn't glance at either of them as she took her seat. Instead, she addressed the judge directly. Your Honor, I am Ruth Adams, the plaintiff, and I'm here to testify. The judge blinked, clearly startled. Well, that changes the record, doesn't it? David's lawyer leaned in frantically, whispering. Why didn't you tell me she was alive? David could only stare forward, his palms now visibly sweating. Outside, the press swarmed, updates flooding news apps. Ruth Adams walks into court, alive and unbowed. What began as a private case had just become a national reckoning. The courtroom hushed again as Ruth stood and took the witness stand. Her voice when she began was soft but unwavering. I heard them. I wasn't unconscious when they made their request. I was trapped, aware, afraid, and alone. She paused, eyes meeting David's. He told the doctor I was more useful dead. And Maria, she agreed. She called me dead before I'd even stopped breathing. Olivia stood calmly nearby, occasionally glancing at the jury. Ruth continued. What they didn't realize was that the doctor, Dr. Donald Okoro, recognized me, and he gave me a choice to let go or to live. I chose to live, so I could return and speak for myself. The courtroom was silent, heavy with emotion. Ruth reached into her folder and held up a printed transcript. This is their recorded conversation. I was the ghost they tried to bury, but I was never gone. I was simply waiting for the right moment to rise. She looked toward the jury, then to the judge. I'm not here because I want sympathy. I'm here because I want accountability. I lost more than my health. I lost my identity, my peace, and my dignity. But I came back for the only thing I still had left, my voice. As she stepped down, Maria broke into sobs, hiding her face in her hands. David didn't move. He sat frozen, knowing that the tide had turned. Ruth returned to her seat, breathing evenly. She hadn't come for revenge. She came for the truth, and now everyone had heard it. The courtroom held its breath as the judge returned from chambers, jury notes in hand. David and Maria stood, shaken, hollow-eyed, as the clerk read the verdict aloud. In the case of Ruth Naomi Adams versus David Ezekiel Adams and Maria Grace Lawson, this court finds both defendants guilty of estate tampering, conspiracy to commit medical fraud, and attempted unlawful end-of-life action. Gasps rang out as Maria's knees buckled. David stared blankly ahead, his composure cracking like glass under pressure. The judge turned stern eyes toward the defense table. Sentencing will be issued in 30 days. Until then, both defendants are remanded into custody. Officers moved forward. Maria sobbed uncontrollably as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. David didn't resist, just turned slowly, eyes landing on Ruth one last time. Ruth stood as they were led away, her arms folded calmly in front of her. The courtroom murmured with reporters whispering furiously into phones. Olivia leaned over. "You just made history," she said quietly. Ruth gave a small, knowing smile. "No, I just reclaimed mine." Outside the courthouse, flashbulbs exploded as Ruth stepped through the doors, surrounded by a swarm of microphones. "Mrs. Adams, what message do you have for the public?" a journalist shouted. Ruth paused. "Don't believe silence is the same as defeat," she said clearly. "Sometimes it's just preparation." With that, she entered the waiting car where Donald sat quietly, nodding in respect. As the vehicle pulled away, Ruth didn't look back once, not at the courthouse, not at the crowd, and certainly not at the prison van disappearing in the opposite direction. She had finally closed the door they once tried to slam shut. Ruth stood at the entrance of the house she once called home. The estate was eerily quiet now, no sound of footsteps, no lingering scent of Maria's perfume or David's cologne. Just stillness. Her fingers brushed against the iron gate as she stepped into the compound. Olivia had handed her the keys after the court transferred all remaining rights and assets back to her name. "You don't have to go back there," Olivia had said, but Ruth needed to. She walked through the door alone, her heels clicking gently on the marble floor. The furniture had been rearranged, new art hung on the walls, Maria's taste, but none of it mattered. Ruth moved through the space not as a wounded wife, but as a woman reclaiming her own silence. She entered the master bedroom last. The sheets were different. The room smelled of lemon-scented cleaner, not lavender like she used to keep. Ruth walked slowly to the dresser, opened the top drawer, and found it still there, her mother's scarf tucked beneath old documents. Carefully, she lifted it out and held it to her chest. The memories came not in pain, but in soft waves. Then, she walked over to the nightstand, removed her wedding ring, and placed it gently on the polished surface. "That chapter's done," she whispered. As she turned to leave, she caught her reflection in the mirror, calm, aged by fire, but no longer broken. She paused only once at the front door, looking around one last time. Then she closed it behind her, leaving nothing but the sound of the lock clicking into place. The goodbye didn't feel like loss, it felt like peace. 3 months later, Ruth stood inside a modest but beautifully arranged bookstore cafe tucked away in a quiet district. Rows of novels lined custom-built shelves, with plants trailing from the corners and the aroma of roasted coffee filling the air. The sign above the entrance read, "Still Standing." It had been Donald's idea, but Ruth chose the name. "Because that's what I am," she'd said with a smile. She now spent her mornings reading to small groups, and her afternoons mentoring young women who came in for more than just books. They came for stories that helped them survive. The pain hadn't vanished, but it no longer dictated her days. She had turned the trauma into testimony. That afternoon, Donald walked in wearing a simple button-down shirt, holding 2 cups of steaming coffee. "They were out of oat milk," he said sheepishly. Ruth smiled, taking a sip. "I'll survive." They sat near the window, watching the world drift by. No more headlines, no more courtrooms, just quiet. "I've been thinking," he said, setting his cup down. "You've taught everyone how to rebuild. But have you thought about what's next for you?" Ruth looked at him, the question lingering. Then she leaned back in her chair, sunlight warming her face. "What's next?" she repeated thoughtfully. "Maybe I finally get to just be." Donald nodded, offering a gentle smile. In that moment, surrounded by healing pages, warm drinks, and the weight of nothing left to prove, Ruth realized she had done more than survive. She had written her own ending, and for the first time in a long time, it was hers. Here's the Bible verse for the story. This verse highlights how, even in deep silence and suffering, justice is never denied, only delayed. Ruth's patience, her endurance, and her choice to wait for the right time reflect the quiet strength of this scripture. Moral of the story. That's the end of the story. What did you learn from this story? Drop your thoughts in the comment section. Leave a like and don't forget to subscribe and turn on post notification so that you'll be notified whenever we drop our next videos. Also, share this video to someone who might be interested. Thank you so much for watching.